Okay, now we're ready to go.
We're good.
Yeah.
Hi, good afternoon and welcome. We are extremely excited to have you here with us to talk about inflation and its impact on the family. So before we start, a quick introduction. My name is Young Mao. I am the newly joined extension educator here within our, well, we didn't change it in this one, but it's the Department for Family Health and Wellness. And I'm joined with my amazing colleague and mentor, Dr. Sharon Powell. And Sharon, may I ask if you can, say a little bit about yourself and before we jump to the next one?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. So great to have you here, and so pleased to be working with my new colleague and longtime friend, Young. I work in the Department of Family Health and Wellbeing. We've just changed that in like the last couple of weeks, so we're still getting used to the new title. But we're part of the College of Extension. And I focus on two different areas within our department. One is financial capability, personal finance, which is what Young and I are going, that's the area that Young and I are presenting about today. And I also work in the areas of family relationships, primarily parenting. So that's me. And yeah, we're happy to have you with us here today.
Excellent. So we'll go to the next slide here. So before we start, if you need caption, please locate the CC button on the bottom of the Zoom screen, and there you can have live caption, just in case I mumble, and I do mumble, or you can just ask me to repeat or ask us to repeat ourselves. We can certainly do that. Next slide. All right, so here is our agenda for today. We'll talk about inflation. We'll look at causes, how inflation impacts family, tips on how to cope or how to manage inflation, and then some community resources. But before we jump in, a quick question for you. If you could enter in the text, how are you feeling right now? Excited, tired? I had 2 cups of coffee, so I feel wired. But how are you feeling right now? Amy's hungry. Yeah, it's lunchtime. I hope you bring lunch. Ready to learn, Ashley, right. Excited for sunshine, I love it. Acceptable, well, that's a new one. Ready to learn, excellent. Good, and please after this, and thank you for joining for joining us. I know it's nice outside. We are starting to see signs of summer, I hope. And we are very glad that you're here instead of being out there, but it should be done soon and you can go out afterward. All right, hungry, good, tired, excellent. All right, so please have them, keep them coming, and I will keep an eye on that, and we will keep an eye on that. If you have any questions, please use the chat to ask us questions. If you want us to stop or anything, we would love to hear your thoughts too as we go along. But let's just get started. Next slide. So before we start talking about inflation, we come up with a case study for you, the Yang family. And then as we go and talk about our presentation and our discussion, we'll just reference this, the Yang family as our family of focus on how this impact them. And again, please jump in if you have additional thoughts. So let's play that.
Okie doke. Let me get to the right spot here.
Meet the Yang family, Katrina, and their 2 children.
We're not seeing that video.
They live in a small
Okay, hang on. Hang on. You know what? I'm just gonna stop sharing altogether for a minute and get to the right place. Oh, we'll just share that. Okay. Can you all see my screen right now? Should
Yep.
be a YouTube thing. Can you see it?
Yep.
Okay.
Meet the Yang family, Katrina, and their 2 children. They live in a small town in the United States and have a combined income of $70,000 per year. The Yang family has always been careful with their money, living within their means and saving for the future. However, recently they have noticed that the cost of living in their town has been steadily increasing. Prices for everyday items such as food, gas, and utilities have all gone up, and the Yang family is feeling the strain. Inflation, a measure of the overall increase in prices for goods and services over time, has been steadily rising over the past few years, and the Yang family is feeling the effects. As prices go up, the purchasing power of their money decreases, making it harder for them to afford the things they need. One of the biggest challenges the Yang family is facing is trying to stretch their budget to cover all their expenses. They have had to cut back on non-essential items, such as dining out and entertainment, in order to make ends meet. They are also finding it more difficult to save for the future, as the cost of saving has increased along with the cost of living. The Yang family is also concerned about the impact that inflation may have on their long-term financial stability. They are worried that their income may not keep pace with rising prices, and that they may struggle to afford the things they need in the future. The Yang family is not alone in facing these challenges. Many families across the country are struggling to cope with the effects of inflation, particularly those on low to middle incomes. It is important for families like the Yangs to cope with the challenges of inflation.
Okay, thanks, Young. Now I'm going to
Thank
share my
you.
screen again and go back to the presentation. All right, well, we'll return to the Yangs a couple times throughout this presentation, but now we're just keeping their story in mind. I want you to just join me for a couple of slides here to give some terms that will help put inflation into context. First, we want to talk about what is inflation actually. And really what inflation is the rise in prices of goods and the reduction of buying power. So basically there's a reduction in buying power as the prices rise because the prices of things are rising more quickly than your salary or any money you have is rising. So one is going much more quickly than the other. So if you think about inflation in terms of like inflating something with air, like a balloon, you're popping and it's increasing. That's what's happening with the prices too. They're growing. And it's out of pace with our ability to pay for them, given the money that we have. So in other words,
Can you share your our PowerPoint with us? Is that okay?
yeah, I thought I was. Oh, sorry,
That's all right.
everybody. Let me try again. Okay, now can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so anyways, so in other words, inflation is what happens when things get more expensive and you need to spend more money to buy the same amount of stuff before the inflation began. Okay, so here's an example just to maybe clarify. If you look at this little coffee cup, starting here over here on the left in 1970, this cup of coffee cost 25 cents. But over time, inflation is something that occurs naturally. But in general, what financial people would like is for inflation to be a very slow, gradual process. But anyways, you can see that over the years, the cup of coffee has grown more and more expensive. So that by 2000, that same cup of coffee cost $1, 4 times as much as it did in 1970. And now by 2022, it costs $1.85 for that same cup. The same amount of coffee, it costs $1.85. So that's just the way inflation appears in the economy.
I would like to have a $25 cents coffee, but I think my coffee costs $5 because I go out and buy a fancy one. It usually costs a lot less, right? So that's that's inflation at work. So, some factors are contributing to inflation, as Sharon mentioned. There's the demand pool, right? When there is demand for good exceeds the available supplies. And if you think about it, it somewhat makes sense. If you have less of something, it's going to cost a lot more. So the price of it just get inflated, right? Especially over the pandemic, which ends now officially. Well, that's great. But during that time, the prices of goods just skyrocketed. My wife and I had our little baby, and the price of formula really skyrocketed, and that is quite stressful, right? And quite stressful for many families that have children, like small children like us, and quite stressful for families that need to just get some basic needs. So next slide, Sharon, please. And there's a cost push, right? Where the cost of producing goods also increases, right? So this, for example, supply chain, the supply chain, I want to say crisis, where you can't really get goods and raw materials to factories that could produce the goods. It was interrupted, especially during COVID. Then the prices of the goods increases, and that's what's happened with the formula, and that's what happened with some of the other products that we have. I know that some medicines are on back order, like months back order, right? And we don't pay for those medicine. Insurance covers some of those, but I'm sure there is a price increase for that, or technology, for example, due to the cost of raw materials getting to where they need to be. Those products also increases, and and the labor is also another thing too. So but that's a different conversation. All right, so next slide. Monetary policy, right? It's occur when supply of money increases faster than demand of goods and services. Over the pandemic, we have a lot of the government increases in spending. So we have aids that's coming in, which is amazing. But as more money flows into the economy, people have more money, and so and then couple that with the limit of supplies, you end up paying for more for the same amount of goods. Right, so, and that's that's what causes. I mean, if you think about the Feds are increasing the interest rates, that's triggers that, right? So we have to increase interest rates so that people it makes it more difficult or costly for folks to borrow money and spend money. So that the idea behind that is to discourage spending of money so that the supply of money in the economy decreases, and then so the prices will catch up. The supply demand factor will balance up a little bit.
Yeah, you may have heard in the news the Fed talking about cooling down the economy or the economy being too hot. And I think what they mean by that is that people are just really anxious to buy things. People are just going crazy buying, not, I shouldn't say going crazy, but are buying things very enthusiastically, and that everyone's so excited about buying things that they are driving demand, making it that it's more difficult to find the things they're buying. And then that makes the cost go up of the ones that are available. And that causes inflation to rise too quickly. So they want to cool things down. They call it cooling it down so that inflation rises more gradually and there's not such scarcity of all the things people want. They just want us to buy things less, basically, and which is why they increase the interest rate. So at least if you have to borrow the money to buy things, it will be more difficult to do so. Okay. So now we're going to talk about some of the ways that inflation impacts all of us individually and the Yang family in particular. So because we just said that things become more expensive, that means, inflation like we're having right now, we're experiencing right now, is happening very quickly, like in just over a matter of months. Things all of a sudden became much more expensive to buy. And so our wages, the amount of money we get paid for work, or any other form of income, does not respond as quickly. So that, like, I'll use my own example. My salary has remained the same in spite of the rising cost of goods and services. So my income stayed the same, but goods and services are becoming more expensive. And that means that my ability to buy things is stressed. And that's what's called purchasing power. So inflation reduces my purchasing power. I have to buy the same things, but they now cost more, but I have the same pot of money with which to buy them. So the Yangs, for instance, have to find the money somewhere to purchase their needs. And that could mean putting less money into other areas, like savings. Perhaps they had a pretty good plan worked out for themselves where they were able to put money into savings on a regular basis. Now it may be that they don't have the money available to put into savings, and they have to use that money instead to pay for all their expenses. If you already were using all of your pay, all of your wages or whatever, all of your income to pay for your expenses, that means that you may need to take some money from savings in order to meet your expenses. So it reduces our purchasing power as a major effect of inflation. Because our purchasing power is reduced, sometimes that can be stressful for people, both physically and mentally stressful. It just kind of depends on your situation and your response to things like that. So it could be stressful because you need to work to make more money. You need more money now to pay for the things that you previously had an okay time paying for. So you might need to just find another job. So that could be physically stressful and mentally stressful, which can lead to sickness. If you have too much chronic stress, it can lead to physical illness. Maybe those of you who are recently like taking finals, let's say, you know how that feels when you go into a week of finals and you're studying like crazy and you got a lot of last minute projects that you're working on. And I don't know about you, but I often caught a cold during finals week when I was a student. And I'm pretty sure that was related to stress and the effects of that on my body. Stress can also put a strain on relationships. So if you're feeling stressed in the work area or outside of your family, you bring that home with you. And it tends to show up in relationships. There may be more conflict, less ability to really be present with your people, whoever they may be. And then the other way inflation can impact the family is by just causing stress due to uncertainty. So you don't know when it's going to end, and you don't know if you're going to start getting paid more necessarily. So it's the ambiguity of that is tough on people. It's really hard to take that in over a long period of time. I guess maybe, Young, do you mind if we stop for a second, see if there's any questions? If you have any, you can put them in the chat, or I believe we gave you
Not
the
mine at all. I
opportunity.
am
to
actually
unmute yourself.
curious. I'm curious to see if, if our community here have experienced other or have other ideas of how inflation impact families, either those who you work with or maybe your own family. I shared some of mine. Stress is certainly some, but this is not an academic exercise, right? This is more you're actually feeling this. I'm feeling this. So we'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
I mean, there are certainly some things that I'm sure people have noticed because it pops up in the news all the time, like when gas became so expensive, and that's come down some, but it hasn't returned to the prices that it was prior to inflation beginning, really, or really ticking up. And then, of course, we're all talking about the cost of eggs and how expensive they are. So there's things like that. Then there's other things that maybe aren't being talked about so much, but that are equally or more stressful, actually. Like, I've noticed my utility bills have gone way up. And that's a long-term thing that's harder to pay for over the long term. And then another thing that you may have noticed is that as interest rates rise, like primarily when I hear about the interest rates rising, I think first about things like getting a home mortgage or a car loan. I think, okay, well, people can wait on that. But one that we don't hear talked about as much is interest rates associated with credit cards. So even if you had a certain interest rate for a long time with your credit card, they can increase the interest rate whenever. And so then you get charged a higher interest rate on your purchases if you don't pay your credit cards in full every month. Let's see what we got here in the chat. Okay. Connie says increasing the interest rates doesn't seem helpful. It's surely, yeah, I don't think it is helpful for the individual consumer who's trying to borrow money, for sure. It's a problem. We are going to talk about it a little bit later, but the flip side of the interest rates being higher as borrowers is that it's also higher for lenders. So if you are in the position to be investing in certain investing your money in certain ways, like savings accounts or CDs, you'll notice that the interest rates that you will earn money for have also increased by quite a bit. So in that sense, they are helpful for all of us. It's just that many of us aren't in the position to just have a lot of money to, set aside and get earn the interest that way. Most of us are more associated with the borrowing side of the interest hikes. Let's see. Carolyn says, we rely on sinking funds for longer term savings goals, and these feel more out of reach because we're not able to save as much from our budget. Yeah, that's right. You're right. You have to spend a larger portion of your income to meet your expenses. So then you don't have as much to put into savings. And if you have goals, like for instance, you want to save a certain amount of money within a year, or you want to set aside a certain amount of money each pay period, you may not be able to do that. And then that can be discouraging because it feels like, I'm farther away from my goal now. So that can be, discouraging. I guess I'd say that's you guys are giving great examples, and I'm sorry that you're feeling stressed out about it. I don't like to know that, but it's the case for sure. Does inflation usually affect the stock prices too? Yes, I think it does, partly in terms of interest rates, which then it's not interest rates on stocks that the Fed manipulates, but just like everything else, people have less money to invest if they are spending more to borrow money, and so that affects the stock prices. But it doesn't affect it in that whatever interest you earn off of investing in stocks is not directly associated with the Federal Reserve. Like, they don't manipulate the interest rate for stocks. That has to do with just the amount of interest those stocks have among investors.
Yeah, and in terms of stock prices, it drives up by earnings, right? So, how much company earns will impact how much their stock sells for, and interest rates impact indirectly in that sense, because, well, companies probably need to pay more to get supplies to produce product, and cut into the bottom line. They may not meet their earning goals, or their earning their earning goals as predicted. So
Oh,
that's
that's a good
also
point.
impacted their stock prices. Yeah. So,
Yeah. Housing prices are increasing a lot. Yep. Oh, so Shelley's saying her house was appraised at a much higher price, which caused their property taxes to increase by quite a bit. Yeah, that's been a real note of concern for people all across the county, I think. So the house you thought you could afford a few years ago is becoming harder to afford as time goes on. Yes. It's frustrating too, because you don't have a lot of influence over this. This is just something an appraiser comes to tell you about.
yeah, and that's also tapped into that supply and demand, right? So housing is in high demand right now, because people are not building it fast enough.
Mm-hmm.
And Sharon and I were having a conversation regarding housing, and we noticed that they don't have that starter homes are scarce, right? So before we can buy we'll call a starter home, housing that's a little older but is cheaper to buy for someone who's just starting out. Now you go out there, and an average house might cost $200,000 or $300,000,
Mm-hmm.
which is a big chunk of change.
Yeah, it sure
And
is.
and because of that price, then the property tax goes with that too, right? So
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot, there's a lot of impact, either directly or indirectly, in terms of inflation for
Mm-hmm.
families. Thank you so much for sharing that too.
Yeah. Okay, and then a little bit more conversation about ways inflation impacts the Yang family. It's decreased the standard of living, probably because they no longer have the same purchasing power as we just discussed. So in real life, that means things like you have to buy cheaper goods. So at the grocery store, for instance, maybe you'll purchase less fresh fruits and vegetables and more canned or frozen things, because those are usually less expensive than the fresh produce. Or you have less money for things like vacations or eating out, those kind of things that you might consider like a splurge, or not, you don't put it in your need category, so it sort of falls down in terms of importance for you. Then that means you're not able to do those things as frequently. Okay, back to you, Young.
Thank you. So here are some ways that the Yang family could manage inflation, right? So when when time gets hard, it is important to take a really closer look at the money that comes in and the money that goes out. Budgeting is not sexy. I never find people use the word sexy to describe budgeting. Maybe accountant do that, but in hard times, I find myself taking a really closer look at where my money is going, and how I spend money. So this is a good opportunity to sit down, and my wife and I sat down and talk about this, about our values regarding money. Where do we want our money to go, since we have limited money to spend? So budget carefully, or even just, if you don't have one, start one, so that you, for the purpose of just tracking your income and expenses. All right, so next one.
Young, may I add one more thing about budgeting?
Absolutely.
Well, some of the research that I was looking at for when we were preparing this presentation was showing that the more quickly you're able to adjust to the change in the prices, the better off you will be, which you're sort of like, yeah, no duh. But I mean, it really helps you feel better in terms of your stress, your sense of autonomy and control over your expenses and stuff like that. So if you are able to monitor your spending right now and you do have a plan, it's easier to respond quickly. But a lot of times people think, I don't know, it just takes a while for people to really see the changes that are happening. And the more quickly you can adapt your plan to fit what's going on in the economy, the better off people feel, and just monetarily, the better off they are as well.
Thank you. And that's true, right? It does take us, for me, it takes me a while to reduce my spending. It's a behavior change, so it takes a few, longer for you to reduce that, or to monitor that behavior change, or to change that behavior even. Another way that the Yang family could manage inflation is to shop around. I find that for our family, shopping for kids' clothes is, if you go to a Target or you go to other stores, it costs a lot of money, and kids grow really fast. And so, you spend $12 on a pair of pants, and then in a couple of months, that pair of pants is no longer fit. So we want to shop for secondhand stores, like Once Upon a Child, for example, and we can get a lot more pants for our buck. Upstairs buy my pants, and so I can get a lot more of that too. And interestingly, as inflation goes up, the number of dollar stores also increases. And we can see why, because people was like, well, I need to find ways to save, so I'm going to go to Dollar General, Dollar Tree, to get the stuff that I need for at a lesser price. But you can be creative, right? I mean, Facebook has Facebook Marketplace, where you go in there and get, you can buy directly from another person, and it's cheaper than going to, say, a retail store. But I am curious, because we have a little bit of time, how do you save? What are some ways that you shop for deals? I shared a few, but if you have some secrets that we all could benefit, we'd love to hear that, or just some tips and tricks. Well, I'm curious about the buy nothing groups. Carolyn, may I ask if you could share more about that? I'd like to buy bulk one. We do that with our family.
Yeah, I was trying to see if my camera would come on. I guess it isn't. But in my neighbor, it's a nationwide movement, but in my neighborhood, there's one on Facebook, and just for like my daughter, you can get a lot of kids stuff, especially, but just anything. Neighbors are just sharing what they don't need anymore, and then asking for, if there's something specific you do need, if somebody else has it.
I like that. That's also help us build community, which is another thing that's decreasing. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Go to food shelf that says, yes, please utilize those food shelves. I know that my family do that. Like, oh, you can get fresh vegetable there, and they're really good. Garage sales, yes. Hand-me-down clothes, absolutely. Most of our clothes so my great nephew. So my nephew has a kid. My great nephew is 6 months older than our kiddos. So we have a lot of clothes from him, which is amazing, right? So thank you so much.
Connie brings up the interesting question, what does that do to local businesses if you're buying secondhand? And it's a good question, something you have to weigh when you're considering all of this stuff. Who do you want to support? And if we're intentional about our buying, I think that's good for everyone, probably. Okay, I'm going to zip along to the next slide here. More ways to manage inflation. One is cost sharing, which I think Young sort of alluded to already, but basically if you could do things like share a living space with families and friends, that could help you cover the cost of living. I know I have a lot of friends who have different people living, like different family members that maybe come in and live with them from time to time for a variety of reasons, but that can help. Another thing you could do is buy bulk and then split the cost. Sometimes I have friends that we go to Costco together and buy things that we need and share. I'm an adult with 2 children who are 22 and 18. So my 22-year-old doesn't live in my home anymore, and my 18-year-old is about to graduate. So I have a Costco membership, but a lot of the things I buy there, I have a hard time finishing on my own. So if I can find somebody to split the cost with me, that's a better deal for us. And then we already mentioned this, but right now is the interest rates for savers are the highest they've been probably in my adult life, I think. And so if you're able to still put some money into savings, you can take a look at various, even just savings accounts, but also CDs will give you, I saw some listed for around a 4% interest rate, which is so much higher than it's been in decades. So that's another thing that you can do to help manage the inflation if possible. You can also take advantage of various social service programs. Someone mentioned going to food shelves, but that's one option. There's another option called FAIR. I think it's called FAIR. And it's a food program that you buy the food, but it's at a pretty discounted rate, and they have trucks that show up around the city, and you just go purchase the stuff and you kind of get whatever is in the bundle for that week, but it includes fresh produce and meat and staples like rice usually and beans, and it's a pretty good deal, and it's a much discounted rate compared to grocery stores, I would say. So if you know of things like that, then it's a great time to take advantage. Organizations like Community Action can help with energy and food costs. It never hurts to see what you might be eligible for in that way. Okay, back to you, Young.
Yeah, thank you. So here's some of the community resources that we found that might be helpful. Ted wrote Ruby's Pantry is great. Sean says Fair for All. I think that's what you mean, right?
Oh, that's
Sharon?
what it's called.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, Fair for All.
Gate Housing and Services, I think is a nonprofit in here. I think it's in Twin Cities. I might be wrong, but they help with furnishing the houses, right? Furnishing homes for cheap or free. Tubman is also a great place for all sorts of services. We mentioned Food Shelf, so the Groveland Emergency Food Shelf, and I think many of our extension colleagues work at Food Shelf too, and so please utilize them. They're just wonderful resources. And then with the extension homepage, there is a resources called Strategies for Spending Less, which is authored by Dr. Sharon Dennis, right, Sharon?
Yep.
And it just gives some tips on how to strategize and how to spend less during times of hardship. I think that's all. We do have a little time, and I would love to hear your thoughts if you have any regarding any of the topics that we cover or other stuff that that you have in mind and you want to share with our community.
Yeah, and in closing, I would say that inflation will not be increasing at this rapid rate forever. Just like actually, I just saw in the news today that the pace has slowed down again. I think it's now 10 months in a row that the pace has begun to slow down. So it's still at 4.9%, which is relatively high, but it's much less, much slower pace than it was previously. So part of this is figuring out how you can put off some major purchases that require borrowing if possible. And, you know, seeing ways that you can take less expensive trips, but that are fun. You know, thinking about things like that and knowing that this is not going to be here forever. And if you can bridge this time, then there will be times when things are better for consumers in terms of inflation and borrowing. We have an evaluation that we would love for you to take. And now I'm realizing Young, did you happen to did you copy this link? I forgot to do that. I think I'm going to see if I can. I'll just grab it quick. I have this open here. So if you could take the evaluation, that's the easiest way to get your points, your wellness points too. I think there's a link at the end of the evaluation that'll take you through to get those points if you're doing that today.
Connie asked any ideas for someone with basically no income to obtain a computer. PC for people, yes. So I was doing a quick search on that, and I think they do offer refurbished computers for free.
It's a good question. We also have many other webinars coming up. You may have been already signed up for a lot of these, but 9 series we have with 31 webinars. So up in the right, if you can all still see my screen, there's a QR code. You can just click on that and it'll take you to a description and the ability to register for these various webinars. I'll leave that on the screen for a minute. Okay, and then finally, here at U of M Extension, we really want you to engage with us. So we have a lot of links here that will help you engage. And I want to point out in particular our YouTube link right here that we have on our channel recorded versions of all of our webinars. So you can go there and just sort of see what we've got and take a look at some of those if you're interested. And then, oh, sorry, Young, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying if there's any last comments from our group here, but I just jumped the gun. So go ahead, Sharon.
No, that's okay. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen now. There we go. There you all are. It's weird when I share my screen, I can't see you. But anyways, yeah, any last questions or comments?
I think that's the eval. I post eval on our chat.
Yeah, and it looks like, I guess when you are mentioning us, we're part of the series called Making Sense of It All. So you can put that in for when you go to get your credit for this. All right, well, thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah. And I'm curious, are there any things that in here that you think that we're missing or that you would like to know for future future webinar around around this topic? Well, all
Young, I
right.
guess that means we thought of every single thing.
With that, are there?
Just kidding. All right. Well, I hope you all have a
much for
great
joining us.
day. And thank you so much for joining us. And hopefully we'll see you on the Zooms again soon. Oh, job resources for young people. Good suggestion. Yeah. We can think about that. There's a lot out there right now. So yeah, that would be great to have some help. All right. Anyways, thank you so much, everybody, and take care. And I hope you have a good afternoon.